Go. All right, so everyone, I'd like to welcome Cam Elliot to Coach's Corner tonight. I first met Cam probably 5 years ago now. He was down at Woodford SSC doing somewhat of what we termed as an internship down there. And Cam, for anyone who does know him, he's an incredible human, comes at things from a different way. I was once facing a very difficult decision in terms of like what I was doing as a coach, and he's someone I reached out to. And he kind of was able to pull the curtains open and let me look at things from a perception that I didn't quite possess before. So I was very thankful to Cam for that moment. He helped steer me in a really good direction. Tonight's presentation should be very fun. Context is king. I'm going to throw it over now to Cam of Principles of Performance.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much for the, yeah, you nailed it. Thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it was, like 5 years ago at Woody's. I'm just stalling while I finish the last couple of transitions on this slide. I can't believe I'm actually nailing this. I haven't made a single mistake either. Yeah, it was like 5 years ago at Woody's when I was, I guess I was a budding PT at the time. I'd been in the industry for already like 2 or 3 years and spent the majority of my time not settling, I guess would be the best way to put it. Like I never just looked at something and went, okay, that makes sense. That's the way it's going to be, like going forward. It was always this sort of tinkerer's mindset to say, why does it work this way? And why does everyone think that this is the best way to do it? And that ruffled feathers, which I always found funny. Even when I was like really young, like 5 or 6, I would always ask questions of people. And when it ruffled people's feathers, my uncle at the time used to say, if you're ruffling people's feathers with questions, it's because they have no answers. If they have no answers, it's because they don't know, which always made it fun in high school when I got a little bit more cocky and opinionated to ruffle teachers' feathers as well by saying that. But that mentality has shaped my drive, my desire to be, I guess, the kind of coach and clinician that I am in an industry where I have a lot of opinions on, and I've since sort of gone a little bit more gently on my opinions, especially in public. But my big opinion that I push is that the health and fitness industry is anything but healthy and fit, and a lot of that stems from the traditional approach to education, where it's the old guard, the ones that used to coach, then become teachers, and then just teach all the same things to the new guard that come through and nothing really changes. And so, yeah, my mission, I guess, since knocking on the door at Woodford's back in the day and humbly asking to be a part of an internship that I felt I didn't have the right to be a part of, has always been to break that cycle of traditionalism, especially within education. And over the last 5 years, one of the mantras that I've adopted is that context is king. And anyone that knows, sort of Woody, Christian's famous for saying, strength is king, and he's not wrong. But there's also ways where you can argue that there are times when that isn't necessary. And then there are people like, I can't even think of a really good example of who says this the best, but like Joe DeFranco says, speed kills. Again, he's not wrong. Speed training is very important, particularly for field-based athletes. But again, there are times where you can do all the speed training in the world, and if you can't access that when you need to, then you're going to be at a deficit to people that might not have been training the same traits as you, but have been able to access their body's physiological potential a lot more readily. So we're going to dive into that tonight by talking about context is king and the science of problem solving. So let me see if this works. Oh, okay. So far, so good. Let me pull up. So can I share screen now, Jared?
Yeah, you should be able to, mate.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So let's share that. Just a quick thumbs up if everyone can see that. Yes. Oh, man, I was so nervous this wasn't going to work properly. All right. Bear with me. We've lost a couple of slides along the way, so I've had to kind of put it together as best I can. But as Jared said, I'm pretty good at kind of just making it work. So the science of problem solving, or as I see it, I guess. It's a good start, isn't it? It's not working. All right. So we have to first start off by, I guess, discussing and defining context as a word, because I've just stated that context is king. So context, as defined in the Oxford Dictionary, is the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood. Your effectiveness as a coach or a clinician, or even as just like a member of any team, is limited to and by the worldviews and perceptions of yourself and those you work with. I like to use this example when I go out to, I guess, schools and have a chat to like the middle school classes. But if I had a red pen here, it'd be much easier to demonstrate. But I normally like pick up a red marker from in front of the class, and I will hold it up and I'll just ask people to try to describe the color red to me. And I notice people sort of sit up straight because I've asked them a question that is making them think differently. And it's also a question that none of them know how to answer. And a lot of the time, particularly with kids in school, if you ask them a question that they're not sure of or don't know how to answer, they won't put their hand up to even try. But I've given them, I guess, an infinite loop sort of question where I've intrigued them with a question that's got no real answer. And then I challenge them to come up with answers, and then we have a bit of back and forth for 5 minutes. So that's something that I would challenge you guys to think about over the next 40 minutes of this presentation before we start asking questions, because I'm going to ask that question again at the end. And I would really love to get some thoughts on that when we get to it. So context, let's go back over that. Context, the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood. That's going to be important for when we get really stuck into the content. So here we have the Earth, a globe, or as some people like to believe, a flat disk that floats through space around a lot of other globes, hovering around a really big globe of fire. And when I look at both of them, the globe or the flat disk, I always like to ask which is correct of the two. And normally I would have both of those pictures up, and unfortunately my slides aren't working. So I would say they both are. And interestingly, this is where, again, you start to, if I present this in front of coaches and clinicians, which I have, you start to get people sitting up a little straighter and giving you a quizzical look, because you've just said that neither party's wrong and neither party's right. And how could that possibly be? It all comes back to context. So the answer is that they're both correct. And I would encourage people to look at the similarities between, for example, both the globe and the flat disk. The similarities here are that we see them both as flat disks. So we see them as circles because we perceive our world around us visually in 2 dimensions, even though we know that it's 3 dimensions. And we're conditioned to believe what we perceive. So we perceive the world in 2 dimensions, seeing spheres as circles, but we navigate the world or the universe in 3 dimensions, and we rely on 3 planes of motion that at all times simultaneously are providing like tactile proprioceptive feedback to our nervous system. And that feedback helps us sort of stand upright and resist gravity. But we don't see that. We see it in 2D. So a good example obviously would be to pick up a ball. You can hold the ball and perceive that it's 3-dimensional, but you only see the 2-dimensional silhouette. So we can see a circle and touch a sphere. We can tell that something is a sphere before we touch it. And that's based on the principles of reflection, the way light hits it. But again, this challenges our perception. Before we had labels for these words, we would have just called it a disc or a circle before we touched it. So in that way, in that sense, neither party is wrong when we look at whether the Earth is a globe or whether the Earth is a disc. And this is part of my, I guess, social superpower, where I can sit in a room with someone that believes the Earth is flat and someone that believes the Earth is a globe, and have a conversation with both of them about it without it devolving into a shit-slinging fest because both parties feel like they're not being heard. As coaches and clinicians and athletes, if we want to work meaningfully within teams, we have to understand that everybody's perceptions, everybody's ability to glean context will be different. And in order for us to get to a resolution, particularly as a coach or a clinician, we need to be able to relate to how people perceive the world around them, whether or not they believe the Earth is a disc or the Earth is a globe. And that's where the importance of context, I guess, comes into it, particularly if you're not a coach or a clinician and you want to effectively work within a team of individuals. All right, we're going forwards. So this is where I come to the question of what do coaches and clinicians actually do? And the best way that I can sort of define the roles, I guess, of coaches and clinicians is we like to think outside the box, and that's problem solving. We have a set of unwavering standards of acceptability, an unwavering standard of acceptable, which is our code of ethics. And that can change from person to person, but inherently it's still a unwavering standard that we set, or we should set for ourselves. This is also called an ethos. And then we empower others with the knowledge we gain through our own personal experiences, which is education. So we try to impart our wisdom and our knowledge, born of our own perceived experiences, onto other people to help them level up, to help them learn to navigate through the globe or the disc, whatever you want to believe in. We provide context is the point of those three, I guess, roles that a coach or a clinician serves, an educator serves, is to provide context. We must make the lesson relatable, otherwise the lesson isn't learned. And kids learn this by positive and negative reinforcement. So it's a lot of, good boy, good girl, or bad boy, bad girl when we do something good or when we do something bad. But when you get to a certain age, that's no longer, I guess, socially respectable to do it in a gym, for example, with clients. They don't like being treated like little kids or dogs. But you can use, I guess, that as an example of breaking someone's behavior. If they're behaving poorly, if they're not adhering to your code of ethics, then you can use those same lessons that they've learned over the years to break their habit, break their cycle to get their attention. But if you ask any typical S&C coach, for example, like what strength is, which I've seen done in several strength and conditioning summits, and I always laugh at it, there'll always be like one guy or girl who will like stand up and snap a salute, and then they'll say it's the ability to produce force, and everyone's like, oh yeah, really good, it is. And then I'm sort of sitting there just like quietly listening and just enjoying the content. But when I have this conversation within like my closed circles, within my like sort of my peers and my colleagues, and even in the little like mentorship groups that I manage and oversee, I always ask this question. And the ones that say, the ability to produce force, typically they're the ones that in like the second or third year of their bachelor's degrees, or they might be doing their masters of strength and conditioning. I'll ask them what they're producing force against, or who they're producing force against, because it's such a vague way to define strength. So I'll say like, what are you producing force against? And a lot of them will say, external load. And I'll say, well, what's the external load? And they'll come back to me with like this wide-eyed sort of deer in headlights look and say, the barbell or the weight. I'm like, what if there is no barbell? What if there is no weight? And then we're starting to get some layers here where they're now being challenged. I'm asking them, what's the color red? Describe it to me. I'm now saying like, well, what if there is no barbell? What if there is no kettlebell? What are we producing force against? And eventually it gets there. We sort of nudge them in the right direction where they start to cotton on and say, I guess, our own body. And that's true relative to gravity. And so strength is typically your ability to produce force against gravity, which doesn't change. So the stronger you get, the more force you can produce against the same level of resistance, which is gravity. And when we can articulate that in a really simple way and explain it to someone like my mum, who doesn't care about resistance training, or a 10-pin bowler or a figure skater, then we can start to get a little bit more buy-in with, say, a strength and conditioning program, because we're providing layers of context to what they do and what they want to be doing better, rather than just saying, well, if you lift weights, you'll get better at your sport, which is typically how a lot of stuff is marketed, and a lot of coaches and clinicians encourage people to go and train. And again, this comes back to sort of my mentorship circles. Actually, this is a good example. I had a great conversation maybe 2 weeks ago with one of the guys where he said to me, I'm having trouble with one of the clients that I'm working with. She doesn't want to lift weights because she doesn't want to get bulky. And I said, that's fine. That's problem. And he said, so what should I do in terms of programming for her? Like, what sets and reps should I do for all of her stuff? You know, how can I measure a maximum recoverable volume? Because we'd been doing a little bit of MRB investigation. And I said, whoa, dude, you've already gone like 600 steps too far. The problem isn't, you know, what sets and reps should we be doing? And the problem isn't what her maximum recoverable volume is. The problem that we need to solve, because we need context here, the problem that we need to solve in order to make her a better athlete is, how do we get her to understand that resistance training isn't going to make her bulky, and it's not going to give her the perception that she has of this female weightlifter. It's just going to make her better at netball because of X, Y, and Z attributes getting improved. And he sort of stopped and pondered it and said, yeah, okay, so how do I do that? And I said, that's a great question. I don't know, because I don't know your client, but you have built a rapport with her. So you need to find a way to teach her all of the things that I've taught you. I mean, we strip it down to basics when I work with these guys, but you need to like find a way to teach her all the things that I've taught you, and even try to explain it to her as if she was your mum, or even if she was like a 12-year-old child or teenager, so that they are understanding it in a way that is relative to what they have a perception of, that they've experienced. And if you can't do that, then you need to go and look at yourself and see if you can broaden your experience, or even ask a mentor to help broaden your experience, because you're struggling to relate it to them. And then if the context can't be applied, they're not going to learn the lesson, and they're not going to do the resistance training. And that was a really cool breakthrough moment for him, because up until that point, it was always, well, some clients will and some clients won't. But now he's at a point where he's like, well, now most clients will, if I can find a way to make them understand the importances of it, rather than feed that negative bias that they have. So that's an important thing to think about with how we provide context. We must make the lesson relatable, or the lesson won't be learned. All right. So if you will, please let me be a coach just for a little bit. And I'm going to take you on a small dive, not a really deep one. Well, it depends. Maybe we'll go deep into the science of problem solving at like a cellular level, because I love physiology. And this understanding all of this sort of problem solving at the cellular level means that we get into it before the subjective levels even come into play. So when you understand how things work at a cellular level, and the similarities between, you know, all 11 systems within the body working together and us having perception, and all the way down to that sort of cell, are astounding. When you understand those, you'll find that there's a lot more context added to navigating our day-to-day in, you know, sort of what we do, what we all share every day, which is we stress about stuff every day. So let's talk about stress for a little bit, and adaptation, and my thoughts around stress and exposure, just so that I can try and impart, I guess, a bit of context for you guys, so that when we get to the case studies and some Q&A, we can come back to what we talk about and make it relevant. So let's talk about adaptation first. So all adaptation is, in my mind, is just very, very rapid cellular problem solving. When you look at it that way, it actually becomes laughably simple, because we could think about, if you've never done a Rubik's Cube before, you look at a Rubik's Cube and think, holy shit, that is the hardest thing I've ever done. And then you'll put it down because you don't feel you have the time to invest doing the Rubik's Cube. If I put a gun to your mum's head and said, solve that Rubik's Cube, you wouldn't put it down until you finished it. And that's the difference between what cells do and what we do. We have the subjective experience that gets in the way and deviates us away from things that make us uncomfortable. Cells just get on with it. It's very rapid cellular problem solving. And I really like it. So by definition, adaptation, the process or change by which an organism becomes better suited to an environment. This will come up again in later slides, so I won't dive too much into it right now. We're just going to talk about, I guess, the process of decay and renewal within this adaptation phase. So we have a process or a constant state of decay and renewal of these cells called autophagy. And as new cells come into play, we obviously have this cycle of old cells dying out. When those old cells die out, they need to be removed in order to make room for the new cells. You can think of this as, I guess, you watch a baby grow. They grow quite rapidly. And that's just the process of old cells dying to make room for new cells. And the renewal process, I guess, or the generation of new cells is a process called mitosis. So cells responding to an environmental change or a stress in order to adapt is done via this process where you'll have a parent cell. That cell will be exposed to a stimulus or a tension or a pressure, and it can't withstand that pressure anymore. So it splits itself into two daughter cells. And this process is very unique in that there's one nucleus within the cell, and as it splits, it copies its own DNA across to two cells where they are now identical cells. It's essentially copy pasting itself. And as those cells start to split and split and split, some cells die off in the process over X amount of time. But you can imagine that as those cells continuously renew, there's a process of growth that is happening. So that's essentially Physiology 101 in a slide based on adaptation and the way that we navigate our environment without any cognitive bias. So you could lay me on a bed in a coma with a tube in my mouth, and I'm still going through this process of autophagy and mitosis. I'm just not being stimulated by anything significant. And so there is a stagnation there, or a plateau. This process can be expedited by taking our egos out of it and making it as objective as possible. So I like to add this in at the end because a lot of the work that I do with clients is not psychological, but there are elements of psychology to it because I'm not a psychologist, so I don't want to give off the wrong meaning here. But I like to challenge people's thought process and belief systems and worldviews, and I like to do that when I'm training them, so that they're not thinking about the work that they're doing. But I'm not trying to hide the veggies under the potato or anything like that. All I'm doing is just changing the way they think about the stimulus, so that when we talk about the stimulus, I'm detecting whether or not they're perceptive, or their body is perceptive of the stimulus, or their brain is perceptive of the stimulus. Like a good example of this would be, I've got one girl that I'm not seeing at the moment, obviously, but when I do see her and she's like lifting, she can do say a 5x5 of deadlifts, and we've worked together for almost 3 years. So she's at a point now where I don't even have to actively watch her do the deadlift. I can passively watch her do the deadlifts in the corner of my eye and watch, say, someone else do a squat. And the act of me passive watching, actively sitting there and staring at her and counting, gives her the confidence and the drive to go off and play with her barbell by herself. But I'm always watching the way she moves the weight. And if I see a rep I don't like, say it's the second and third rep I don't like in set 3, I'll go over to her at the end of set 4 and say, how did that set feel? And she'll always say, oh, look, it felt really good. Maybe reps 4 and 5 were probably a little sloppy in set 4. And I'll say, cool. Tell me about set 2 and 3. Tell me about reps 2 and 3 in set 3. And she'll go, oh, they were shit. And I'll say, why were they shit? And she'll tell me exactly why. She'll say, I didn't have any tension. My hips moved before the bar, blah, blah, blah. I'll say, great. At least you're aware of it. So you've found a problem and you're already actively solving it, rather than relying on me to sit there with a megaphone in, a chair, lifesavers chair, and shout out cues and tell her how to do a better job. She's not learning that way. She's experiencing, but she's not learning. And there's a distinct difference. So we're about to talk about that difference now. But I just wanted to be sort of pointing out here that there's a reason I've put this bad boy here at the end of this. You can expedite this process by taking your ego out of it and just experiencing it and learning it for yourself, asking questions when you're not sure, obviously. And it's good to have built a rapport of trust with your coach to know that they're always there watching and then they have you back. Okay, let's look at stress. Stress is one of my favorite things to talk about. So stress is, as you could guess, we're defining it because I am principles of performance and I like to define stuff. By definition, pressure or tension exerted on a material object, which we just talked about in terms of mitosis, the thing that stimulates cellular mitosis is pressure or tension exerted on that cell. So cells are constantly being squeezed and their natural instinct or process is to divide to withstand the squeeze. Again, I'm just as the subjective cognitive experience, but your psychology is driven by hormones, which is based on your endocrine system. It's one of 11 systems that make up your metabolism, and you can measure those systems at any given time to get an output, which is your homeostasis. If your endocrine system is thrown out of whack, your psychology is thrown out of whack as well. So I like to ensure that people understand that your psychology is part of your physiology in terms of cells, and those cells can be affected by stress or exposure, which we're going to talk about. And if they can be affected by stress, then they can be affected by de-stress rather than distress. So stress is multifactorial and summative. The body does not discriminate between stressors. It is all just stress. And this is another important factor. And something I like to teach everyone I work with very early. You can have a really bad night's sleep. You can skip breakfast, get grumpy at traffic, have a car accident on the way to work, yell at your boss, not be able to go and have lunch because you're piled under with work, get held back late, get to the gym and be in a bad mood, have your set training session, get home, stuff your face full of food, sit on the couch for 2.5 hours, watch Netflix with a stomach ache, go to bed and have, the shittest night's sleep ever and do it all again the next day. That's a whole day's worth of accumulated stress that your body doesn't discriminate against in any way. It just sits there and says, that's a big pile of shit. It doesn't sit there and say, oh, well, some of that stress was good for us because we exercised, and some of that stress was kind of good for us because we had a big meal at the end of the day, and some of that stress was really bad because our boss is upset. It just sits there and says, this is a big pile of shit and I don't like it. Metabolically, your 11 systems throughout the body get exposed to that. They just get exposed to a big pile of shit. They don't get exposed to one stimulus different to another. You could argue that musculoskeletal systems are specifically exposed to resistance training, and you're not wrong. But at the same time, if there is stress within the system and say your endocrine system is playing up, then your arousal levels may affect your intent or intensity at the bar. And that could lend itself to a soft tissue injury, which may make you feel worse. And then that could affect a whole week's or months worth of training and throw out a cycle. So all these systems are interlinked and they work together to create this thing we call metabolism. And it's important to understand that stress, while it has many different sort of factors to it, the body doesn't identify it that way. It just says, that's a big pile of shit and I don't like it. So we understand this principle because it's paramount to what we do as coaches and clinicians. And we're about to tie this into what we do as coaches and clinicians. If you remember what I said before, we problem solve, we add context, we have our ethos, we set our standards, and we like to educate. We like to impart our knowledge and our wisdom. Part of having that knowledge and wisdom and that experience comes from understanding now the difference between stress and exposure. And I hope that all of you at one stage have felt the difference between exercise, general exercise, and training. When you're training and you're in a training block, it's not easy, but it's dosed. When you're exercising, general exercise, it could be hard, it could be easy. Usually it's regulated to easy and it doesn't feel like you're doing much. It just feels like you're ticking the boxes. Both can be stressful, but one can be measured. So we talk about exposure. It's the light side of the moon compared to stress. So we've got exposure. By definition, the fact of experiencing something or being affected by it because of being in a particular situation or place. This is the person that chooses to come to the gym to see me because he or she wants to get better, rather than they come to the gym because they want me to whip their ass and they want to feel validated for the day. I always tell people, if you want to come to the gym and just get sore and sweaty, you pay me $90, I'll hit you with a stick in a sauna, because I'm not wasting my time and I'm wasting yours. But if you want to train, if you want to fucking train, then we're going to do it this way. We're going to gradually expose you, or your nervous system and your 11 systems, I guess, gradually expose you to a stimulus that makes you better. You're not going to train hard and you're not going to train easy. You'll do the easy work and you'll do the hard work. And at the end of that training block, you'll have a yield that will be based on the effort you put in. It's as simple as that. And 9 times out of 10 people go, oh, fuck, you're not mucking around. And I go, of course not. And then they buy in. Straight away they buy in. They go, yeah, I want to do that. Great, let's do that. Rather than getting to the end of 12 weeks and going, I didn't get my goal. And then I go back and look at their training block and go, you missed 11 sessions. And they go, oh, I guess I did. And then it turns into a shit fight. So I like to make it objective. If I can make it objective, 1, it protects my ass, but 2, it holds them accountable. As coaches and clinicians, or even as general athletic populations, our intent should be aimed at deliberate and measured exposure to create a change in behavior, which is what I just said. If you can measure it, which we're about to talk about, if you can measure it then you can quantify the change positively or negatively. And that is power. So behavior change can and should be measured in order to quantify whether or not the change is desirable. And we talk about, there's a video on my YouTube channel, which I just put up, which talks about metabolism and homeostasis, and how both of these terms are often misunderstood and misrepresented in the health and fitness industry. And essentially what we're looking at is, can you quantify a change in someone's homeostasis positively or negatively? Yes. How? Based on their metabolism. Well, how do you quantify someone's positive or negative change in their metabolism? You test it. And I challenged people to ask me how you test the 11 systems. And I came up with a test for every single one of them. I can't administer them, but I know that you can do them. When we talk about performance as an output, we're talking about behavior change. So behavior change is just performance output. And you can and should measure that to ensure that you're making a change. But you can start that at the lower end as well, which is, I guess, health, which underpins that all, and how stress is affecting that person. So coaches and clinicians should encourage a graduated approach to exposure where possible. This can be done by the principle of progressive overload, which is intent coupled with intensity. So those are the two underpinning principles of progressive overload. And now we're talking about the difference between training and exercise. One doesn't necessarily take into account this principle of progressive overload. We'll talk about it later, but obviously there's that principle of, or the said principle, specific adaptation to imposed demands. Specific is the key word. And if we're not thinking specifically, we're just thinking generally, then you're going to have a generally bad time. So what we want to be doing is encouraging a graduated exposure stimulus so that we can measure the change. If we're measuring the change, then no one can argue that it's working or it isn't working. If it isn't working, there's a reason. And if it is working, there is a reason. No one can argue it. This comes back to what we talked about at the start, where we perceive what we believe. If I had $1 for every time I've had a client say, like, client miss a rep, and they say, oh man, I feel so friggin' weak. Oh, I'm a piece of shit. And I go, man, 2 years ago, you couldn't lift your body weight. And now you're slinging 2 times your body weight for reps. And the fact that they lose perspective because they get bogged down in their, you know, their right now perception is testament to what I just said. We perceive what we believe, where they hit a plateau and they think that they're the weakest piece of shit in the world. And I'm guilty of it. Like, you can ask Jamie Smith from Melbourne Strength Culture. For ages, I couldn't hit 200 kilos on a deadlift. And for ages, he kept telling me I could. And all it was just the fact that it wasn't moving off the floor fast. And I just kept letting bar go. And he was so frustrated until one day where, actually, I think it was with you, Jared, when we were at Wilfred Casey. And I just picked it up and he looked at me, he's like, you just got to keep pulling. That's all it is. And I was like, man, I get it now. But because I'd never perceived what 200 kilos felt like, it was hard for me to believe that it could be done. But I'd perceived max effort lifting before. It's the same stimulus. It's just that I'd gotten in my head that 200 was some magical number, but it's not. It's the same stimulus. Maximal effort loading is still the same stimulus as an arbitrary number you throw out. So it's important to understand that graduated approach to exposure is more important than just slapping plates on the bar and thinking that this is going to work. All right. So let's add some context and exposure to a few of my, I've put unpopular modalities. I don't use many of them, but a lot of these get slammed pretty frequently on social media. So let's talk about them because, again, I can spin anything because I'm a bit of a salesman. Number one, foam rollers. I just had a conversation with one of the guys in the mentorship group that said, there's a physio up in where he's from. I won't say where, just in case, because he's pretty vocal about this, who says foam rollers are shit and don't do anything. And I said, well, what does he say foam rollers don't do? And he goes, oh, he says foam rollers don't give you more mobility and don't help with recovery. And I was like, well, okay, well, they won't if you don't use one, and if you don't use it properly, it's going to do neither. And then he goes, but how does it give you mobility? I was like, well, it doesn't give you anything. It just creates this transient window, this opportunity for you to downregulate some nociceptive chemical reaction in your body to pain. And now all of a sudden you're able to access a bit more of the readily available range you'd normally have if you didn't have that sensation. And he looked at me and went, what? I was like, yeah, that's all it does. It just makes it feel a little better when you rub your boo-boo and it doesn't feel sore anymore. And now you can walk on it. That's what a foam roller does. It just expedites the recovery process because it helps downregulate that nociceptive response. And he goes, oh, well, I couldn't tell that to the physio. I'm like, I know, because you don't understand it. So it's not that the foam roller doesn't do anything. It's that the foam roller doesn't do anything in the hands of someone that doesn't understand what a foam roller could do. And definitely a foam roller won't do anything if you don't use it properly. This comes back as well to the discussion of evidence-based practice where, and I'm having this fight with one of the guys in the myotherapy course that I'm doing, who is, if science was a lady, he would try to marry it. He loves science so much. And I love science too, but there's this dogma that's around evidence-based practice at the moment where science needs to tell you exactly what to do or it doesn't work. And he will argue with me until the day he dies that foam rolling does nothing. And yet, in my opinion, evidence-based practice comes from having the perspective, the wisdom, and the knowledge from experience of helping coach people through better movement using whatever tools you've got available. And time and again, I've used foam rollers, I've used voodoo floss bands, I've used TheraBands, I've used heavy resistance bands to make a change in somebody's pain or mobility or motor control. And I've witnessed it. I've done it. I've done it with my hands. I've done it with bands. I've done it with tools. And that is evidence-based practice in and of itself if you're using that to leverage a better platform for your coaching or like clinical work. But if you're just letting, quote unquote, biased, they might not be biased, but if you're letting biased science papers dictate the tools that you can and can't use, then you're going to find yourself pigeonholed into, I guess, specializations that don't lend themselves to finding new solutions. Problem solving. So when you become a specialist, you're essentially becoming a specialist with a tool. So it's a hammer. And then all of a sudden, every problem becomes a hammer related problem and you can see a hammer related solution. Someone comes along with a drill and they're a witch doctor. And then they use the drill and they're obviously a charlatan. They're selling you snake oil, but they make a change. And then obviously there's some sort of placebo effect to that change. Maybe there is a placebo effect, but the fact that there's a change should be evidence enough to suggest that that person got better from this. So I'm going to take this tool and put it in my toolbox. It might get a bit of dust, but I know how to use the tool. And that's why foam rollers are, in my opinion, quite an important staple in a gym, but only if you understand how they're used. If you don't know how they're used, then they'll never be in your gym and you'll never use them and you'll find other ways of getting around it. They might be easier, they might be harder, but as you'll see as we go down the list, slamming tools and modalities doesn't make anyone better. Yoga and Pilates. I'll be 100% honest. I used to put my hand up for this one. I used to be the person arguing that yoga doesn't make you a better performer. Pilates doesn't make you a better performer. Only resistance training and, sport specific work does. Sport specific work being, you go and do your sport. I'm not wrong, but I'm also not right because within yoga, not Western yoga because Western yoga is bastardized, but within the Eastern principles and practices of yoga, they utilize the breath. And we're going to talk about the breath in about 5 minutes, but they utilize the breath. And something really interesting happens when you slow your breathing down. You become more tolerant to carbon dioxide, and that tolerance to carbon dioxide upregulates your ability to utilize oxygen at the hemoglobin level. And what that does is it takes all of the stress that you've accumulated, that big pile of shit, and it starts to diminish it. When you're doing yoga properly, and I don't know how to do yoga properly, but I do know how to breathe properly. When you're doing yoga properly, and I've witnessed this again, evidence-based practice, I have seen some seriously crazy changes in mobility, motor control, both loaded and unloaded. I've seen PBs change based on just someone's ability to communicate with someone else's nervous system by asking them to get into a position and just breathing, not holding their breath and not getting a little bit overworked, but just breathing. It was very, very eye-opening. And I decided to do some research into it, which got me into sort of more breathing and breath-related skill or education. And then the same goes for Pilates as well. Pilates gets slammed by a lot of physios. And the funny thing about, I guess, slamming other modalities that I've just thought of now is when I was a PT, physio slammed PTs. So I wanted to try my hardest to become a respected coach. And respected coaches slam physios and EPs slam coaches for being wannabe EPs, and osteos slam physios, and physios slam myos, and myos slam remedial massage therapists, and we all slam friggin', I don't know, naturopaths. But at the end of the day, it's just this really shitty dogmatic circle that we're all sort of chasing each other's tails in. And if you're able to apply context to the person that's in front of you, that person that may be intimidated by resistance training, but still needs to stimulate their nervous system and their muscles and their skeletal system in whatever way possible, and you put them on a reformer and they get a little better, they get a little bit more functional in their day-to-day tasks, and they get less sort of non-specific pain. I don't care if you have studied Pilates your whole life and you've done a whole bunch of papers on it to prove that there's no efficacy in Pilates. If I find one person that's had a positive experience from Pilates, I'm going to tick the box and say, well, that must work for that person. Therefore, I'll put the tool in my toolbox. And when we use resistance bands to create movement patterns, we're essentially doing Pilates anyway. We're just not doing it on a moving bed. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of credence to yoga and Pilates in terms of how many popular strength and conditioning coaches these days use tools to either warm up or increase mobility or increase proprioception to their clients, their athletes. All right, dry needling and cupping, another one that I argue incessantly over with my with my myotherapist supervisor. Again, I've seen it work, and we use a lot of dry needling in myotherapy, and we use a lot of cupping, and we even see it work in the clinic on the students that we're doing it with. And he's the supervisor for that class, and he still tells us vehemently that dry needling and cupping is a waste of time and doesn't do anything. And we recently had a lady who, well, she's a lady. Of course, she's a lady. She's in the class, and she has my fibromyalgia. And she,
one more time.
Oh, let's listen to what Haley's talking about, because I want to know.
Haley, you better mute yourself.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't. No, I want to hear.
I got you back,
So,
Haley.
Shit. So she's got fibromyalgia, which is just non-specific full body pain. And she's never tried dry needling before. She's also never tried breathing before. And she got paired up with me. And she was so scared of this needle. She was terrified of it. And I was terrified to put a needle in her, because I'm like, shit, I don't want to make you feel worse. And I said, look, let me just put it in your forearm, because I don't want you to freak out. And let's just sort of gradually expose ourselves to this stimulus. And she said, okay, we can do forearm. And she just gripped my hand while I had to do this dry needle one-handed. And I got the needle in, and we breathed. And then I sort of fiddled with the needle. I got a little trigger point, just left it. And then in the act of holding her hand, I just asked her to do some breathing work with me that I've, like a little breathing routine that I've picked up called box breathing. And we just did that for 5 minutes. And I literally felt her whole body melt just from holding her hand. I literally felt her whole body melt on the table. And I said, are you okay? And she goes, oh my God, I feel so relaxed and at peace. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Can I pull the needle out? And she goes, I forgot the needle was there. And I pulled the needle out. She goes, oh, my shoulder doesn't hurt. Oh, my back doesn't hurt. Oh, my knees don't hurt. Nothing hurts. I'm like, that's really cool. I'm really glad. And then she got up and she just went straight down, touched her toes, like straight leg toe touch. She goes, I haven't been able to do that since I had kids. I said, that's really cool. And then I looked at my supervisor and said, man, I really wish these dry needles were a little bit more effective. And he didn't take it as the joke it was intended to be. We ended up in this hot debate. He was saying, it's the breathing. I'm like, well, maybe it was both. The purpose here, or the point here, is that if you've seen it work, it might just work. Put it in the toolbox. Perturbation training. So again, we eat with our eyes on Instagram and social media in general. And you see a lot of athletes that, they jump on BOSU balls or exercise balls and stuff. And I used to be one of those people who roll their eyes and go, oh my God, this clown. Even, like Nadia Guilara from Functional, I think that's how you say his name, from Functional Patterns. I used to have so much fun getting into boxing matches with him on social media about some of his ridiculous claims. And he still makes those claims, but the more experienced version of me can sit back and appreciate it a little more and say, you know what, man, you're doing good things. You're making changes to people's lives. And if I could, I'd shake your hand and at least apologize. We might not ever be friends, but I can at least appreciate that he's doing good work in the context of, his ethos. perturbation training or unstable training, all you're trying to do is create an overly stimulated nervous system to create an overly responsive musculoskeletal system. And this is an amazing way to either catch up a lagging body part without isolating the part, or to introduce someone into early stage rehab, because everything they do, let's say they've just had an ACL reco, anything they do that isn't supported on that one leg is perturbation training. You don't even have to give them any unstable surface, and now they're doing perturbation training. And then when you look at it that way, anything that you give them on top of that, so you could ask them to throw a tennis ball at the wall standing on two legs, and one leg is shoddy. They're throwing a ball at a wall, they're now creating a perturbation. That's perturbation training. And then you start building those layers, that graduated exposure effect. And before you know it, rehab doesn't seem so scary for people, because they're being introduced to it in low doses, and they're getting back to sort of more normal activities, something like standing up on 2 feet, throwing a tennis ball at the wall, and asking them, hey, just challenge yourself with your stance and maybe stand with one foot on the ground, but the other foot sort of just on the toe supporting. It's that graduated exposure, which is really effective. Agility ladders, oh baby. So again, I used to be a big advocate for this. Agility ladders don't make people more agile, which is true. By definition, agility needs an external stimulus to respond to in order for it to be classified as agility. But the thing that agility ladders do very well is they help people coordinate their foot speed and their rate coding. I won't get too deep into the science of it, but just understand that the faster you can move your feet and coordinate that with your nervous system, the more times you're putting force into the floor and absorbing the force from the floor, means that when you accelerate or decelerate in a straight line, the more times you hit the floor with your foot, the faster you will accelerate or decelerate. That is undisputed. And if you want to change direction, if you can slow down on a dime and then cut left without having to absorb all of your body weight going forward when you do it, you'll be much more resilient without having to work nearly as hard as many would. And the difference can be seen in really good field-based athletes, where they seem to just get the ball and they've got all this space around them because no one's playing on them, except they're able to just navigate the world around them so much easier because their foot speed is insane. It's phenomenal. And I used to watch Gary Ablett Jr. and all I would be watching is his feet. I'm like, this guy's a freak of nature. Even people like Bontempelli or Pendlebury, you watch their feet and their feet move so much in such a small area. Dustin Martin's another good example. His feet move so much, especially when he's about to get tackled. His foot speed increases insane amounts. And all of a sudden he's putting so much force into the ground that no one can hold on to him. But everyone says, oh, it must be his upper body strength. And I'm watching his feet going, this dude's like a friggin' piston. It's very cool to watch. Agility ladders don't make you more agile, but faster feet does make you more agile because you're able to get your feet contacting the ground more. That's more information into your nervous system being readily absorbed. That proprioception, when you can navigate it, makes you faster, it makes you more agile. When you can't navigate that information coming in, then you've got a problem. Then an agility ladder is not going to do shit for you. Lucky last. Whew. This is where we get into the science of it, because I like this shit. Altitude/oxygen deprivation masks, they don't make you fitter, which is true. However, an altitude mask or an oxygen deprivation mask, let's not get them mixed up. Altitude mask isn't an altitude mask because it's not changing the percentage of oxygen per breath. So the oxygen molecules are the same amount per breath unless you go X amount of meters higher than sea level. Then you'll get a different gradient in oxygen molecules. But it is depriving you of oxygen. And this is important to understand because when we talk about stress and exposure, there's a very important element to stress that often gets overlooked. And many people talk about the stress hormone, which is cortisol, but no one can tell me the stress molecule, which is carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide, when that builds up in the system, it creates all sorts of problems for all sorts of people. And it happens more often than most people think. And it's one of my favorite games to play with anyone new that works with me, particularly when I have an assault bike. I'll give them a little aerobic sort of test. It's nothing hard. It's honestly nothing hard, but the perception of it is incredibly hard because I induce a panic state or an anxiety state for the people that I work with that have they have anxiety. But again, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not working at it from a psychological element. I'm working at it from an energy system element. The people that work with me that have sort of anxiety or even some depression and they want to sort of work on that from another point of view, I get them doing some breathing, some box breathing, which induces a very mild panic, and it replicates their anxiousness. And they get an opportunity then to graduate themselves to that exposure. So they can sit there and breathe and recognize that that's the feeling that they get when they're getting into that panic state. And they go, oh, wow, okay, everything's fine. And it is fine. And normally when they do go into an anxious sort of panic attack, everything is still fine. It's their nervous system being bombarded by chemicals saying something's wrong. And so what the benefit here with altitude/oxygen deprivation masks is, the upregulation in CO2 means that your body has to work hard to offset that extra carbon, that carbon that comes from the end of oxidative phosphorylation. For those playing at home, that's aerobic respiration. And if we remember what I said about cells before, cells need oxygen, and they won't be able to utilize that oxygen if they don't have the catalyst for that, which is carbon, and then carbon dioxide, which is the molecule that helps us offset the carbon from our body. So when we are training, I guess, that stress response, or when we're even training our aerobic respiration, we can take advantage of something like an oxygen deprivation mask, and you can save yourself the $20 or $30. You don't even have to buy a straw. Just close your friggin' mouth and jump on an assault bike, and jump on the assault bike for 20 minutes. And you don't even have to go hard. Just do it with your mouth closed and breathe through your nose. That's oxygen deprivation. You're not depriving yourself of the volume of molecules per breath. You're depriving yourself of the volume of oxygen in terms of lung capacity per breath. And what that's doing is it's creating an environment within your nervous system that thinks, I am dying because I'm not breathing. I'm not getting oxygen. It's used to getting oxygen rapidly because you get stuck in glycolysis, which is just snapping 6 chains of carbon molecules and living off the ATP that you yield from that. And it's not effective. But when you start to stimulate your oxidative phosphorylation, which is more down that aerobic respiration chain, interesting things start to happen, specifically the stress response. And so when I start to program that stress response with aerobic work, I see insane gains in terms of cardiovascular fitness, and even in terms of like resistance training. Like intra-set recovery is insane. Like people go from needing 3 or 4 minutes of rest after some 80% effort lifting to like 30 seconds to 60 seconds. Like, I can go again. I'm like, I know you can go again, but just give yourself a little bit of time to adjust. And it's really, really cool to observe, and it is observable. And if it's observable, it's measurable. And so we do a lot of work in terms of wattages and times and intervals on the bike to stimulate that and nudge it. I think it's very, very cool. But it's important to understand that all that the altitude or the oxygen deprivation mask is doing is it's just creating a more carbon dioxide rich environment. Is that good for you? Well, arguably no, but it depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to stress the system out, or are you trying to expose the system? If you're trying to expose it, then there should be a dosage, and that dosage should be well within your standards of acceptability, your ethos. So yeah, I like them. All right, let's have a quick talk about this case study, because I definitely want to get through this so we can have a chat. So SC, she's given me permission to use her as a case study, but just for purposes of anonymity, I don't want to use her name. Although I'm having an interview with her in a couple of weeks anyway for Principles of Performance. So if you pay attention, you might just see her featured on the YouTube channel. Okay, so she's from Australia. She's from Victoria, but she's a Canadian basketball collegiate athlete. So she got a scholarship to go over there. I won't say where, because I don't want to, it's going to get pretty hectic and I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. So she came home from Canada at spring break this year, and she was having some recurring hip and knee injuries, which was really frustrating her. Her coaches weren't happy with her work ethic on and off the court. They suggested consulting a sports physician for surgery on her hip and her knee when she was back home. They also gave her a training program to help her return to match fitness and readiness. This training program consisted of a shit ton of running and a lot of hill sprints, which I found interesting when, she was consulting a sports physician, RE, hip and knee surgery. But again, that's not for me to say. I've worked with her before. So she's from here. So we worked together in order to get her sort of fighting fit for her second year in college, because she struggled a little bit with her first. And she's still only young as well. I've worked with her before. She's an absolute delight to work with, very inquisitive, kind, friendly, and always willing to put the work in. So when they said to me that they had a problem with her work ethic on and off the court, that was a red flag for me. I was like, well, that can't be the same SC that I know. I nearly just said her name. So we first got in touch 1 week before the first round of COVID lockdown in Victoria, which was like early March, I think, maybe. Or maybe it was mid-March. Anyway, that's just to give you some context. So she'd been consulted by 5 different physicians. 2 of them in Canada were sports surgeons that she'd been advised to go and see on her own dime. So her dad paid for that from back in Australia, which was very awesome. And then the other 3 were just her in-house, like physio or physical therapists, they call them over there, and an exercise physiologist equivalent. I can't remember what they were called. Anyway, she went to the sports surgeon for the sole purpose of getting a scan. The first sports surgeon just sort of assessed her hip and said, yeah, we need to book in for some surgery, and then billed her and kicked her out. And then her dad said, well, I need a scan. And then she got in contact with me when she was still over there and said, hey, what are my options? And I said, well, I kind of need a scan as well, because I don't know. And at least if I've got a scan, I can put you in touch with people I know in Victoria that can help sort of navigate this. So she went back for another scan, and the guy didn't do a scan. He just said, I don't think we need to do a scan. It just feels like, he said it feels like an FAI. And I was like, well, it's easy for him to say it feels like an FAI when he's the one that's sort of assessing it and also getting paid to do the surgery. But the other part of that as well is that you can't feel an FAI unless it's horrible. And the things that SC was saying, I said her name again, the things that SC was saying to me didn't tie in with an FAI or femoral acetabular impingement for those playing at home. In terms of the way that she was presenting with her symptoms. And I couldn't comment on it any further until I sort of got my hands on her. So she got home, and we had a really cool chat via Zoom, and she made plans to come out and see me the following week, and then lockdown happened. So I didn't even get to get my hands on her before we went into lockdown, which was brutal. Anyway, she came back home. She had 101 kilos on her. Her left hip, her left knee were really bad, and her back was sore. Like her back was painful. Week 1, our Zoom consult, I said, look, here's some things that we can look at just before we sort of go down the route of surgery, because I want to make sure I'm putting you in the right hands. So let's do some movement assessment via Zoom. Really hard to do. It took 2 hours, but we got there. And what I found was when she was laying on her back and I asked her to do a straight leg raise, she couldn't perform that without getting pain in her left hip. And her left hip raise wasn't getting past 40 degrees bilaterally, which was really cool. It was good that we were bilateral, because I hate when it's unilateral. And then I asked her if she had like a band, and she had like a really thick band. And I said, great, grab the thick band, try and pull it apart as hard as you can, and then get your dad to grab it from like over your chest and pull it towards your head just lightly. And he did. And then when she lifted her leg, she got no pain, which tells me that she may have a postural or positional dysfunction where her pelvis is tipped forward and it's closing the front of her acetabulum. So her femur's butting into the pelvis early when she hip flexes. And that's typically because she lacks motor control through the torso. And we confirmed that when I asked her to do a trunk stability functional test, where it's just a trunk stability push-up, but she can't do a normal push-up without buckling under the weight of her hips and getting back pain. So again, like we're just getting context here. We're just putting pieces of the puzzle together. So I was immediately less concerned about surgery, and I wanted to get to the bottom of why she may just be experiencing non-specific pain. So I said, hey, for the next week, here's a couple of videos of some mobility stuff that I want you to do. Here's some breathing that I want you to do. Let's take some stress out of the system. And also I want you to track your calories for me over the next week. And she said, no worries, no worries, no worries. We came back the next week. And as I said, I've worked with her before. She's really diligent. She really buys into this stuff. And I friggin' love working with her. I wish I had 10 of her. So she comes back to me and she goes, okay, I've been doing all my mobility work. And here's where we're at. So she goes and does her straight leg raise and she gets like 50 degrees bilaterally. She's still got some pain. I'm like, that's fine. Don't stress. She goes, my knee doesn't hurt anymore. Awesome. So that's a win. Let's call that a win. She goes, my back still hurts. I'm like, that's fair. Understandable. We get that. And then I said, hey, when, again, this is a conversation that I have with all my clients, but I said, hey, when are you due for your menstrual cycle? She goes, oh, I'm in the middle of it now. Okay, well, maybe your back's hurting because we're in the middle of a menstrual cycle. So let's give it another week. Also, how'd you go with your calories? And she came back to me and said something crazy, like, oh, I'm eating like 1,300 calories a day. And I was like, you what? She goes, yeah. So I had to keep it cool because I didn't want to scare her into thinking that she was doing something wrong. But I said, okay, cool. So we're 1,300 calories a day. We might need to bump that up. How long's that been going on for? And she goes, oh, that's been for a while. My coaches, who are all men, told me that I needed to lose weight and that I shouldn't be eating as much. And I said, okay, that's fair. In my head, I was like, that's an alarm bell because your training load hasn't changed, but your energy load has changed. So it's an alarm bell. Again, we're just building context. Then I asked her for the next week's worth of homework to just gauge how much protein she was eating roughly per day. And she said, no worries. And then I asked her if she'd be able to find another 150 calories a day for me, just because I was a little bit concerned, which is an understatement. I was a little bit concerned about her caloric deficit. And she goes, okay, no worries. So we found 150 calories just in a snack. It was like salmon and cream cheese. And she's like, yeah, cool. I'll eat that. So over the next week, we bumped her up to about 1,450 to 1,500 calories, which is getting there. It's progress. But then she comes back and says, so I'm eating 40 grams of protein a day on average, which is another red flag. And if there are any health professionals in here, one of my big red flags, my contraindications that I'm always wary of when I train women, and she was ticking all the boxes from week one, is something called residual energy deficit syndrome, REDS, where women can hormonally just break themselves by undereating and overtraining. So they put themselves in this really big death spiral. And she was coming into that danger zone pretty heavily. Obviously, we couldn't get tests for it because we were in lockdown and it was really hard to get in for consults. So I encouraged her to do a bit of research. I gave her a few links and said, here's what REDS is, and I'd really like you to, do some research around this. And she's very diligent. She came back and said, okay, so I'm under eating by a lot. And I said, oh yeah, you are a little bit. How much do you think you're under eating by? And she came back with a number and she said, I'm under eating by about 1,200 calories. And I was stoked. I'm like, yeah, you kind of are. And she goes, okay, so I don't think it's feasible for me to start eating 2,700 calories a day, but how about we start somewhere in the middle? And this was self-directed development based on that gradual exposure, rather than me saying from week one, 1,300 calories isn't enough. You need to bump that by 1,400 calories. So now we've got that element there where it's mutual education, where we're learning from each other. And then she said, oh, also my protein is way too low. And I said, oh, what level do you think it is? And then she came back and started citing all this research. She's like, oh, well, it depends who you ask, but I think it needs to be about like 2 to 2.2 grams per day per kilo for a female. And I was like, well, yeah, pretty spot on. Do you think you can eat 160 grams of protein a day? And she goes, probably not. I'm like, well, I don't think you can eat 300 grams of protein a day. So let's back it off a little bit and see what we can do in terms of making it work for you. So we set it on like an 80, 90 grams a day, and we found some snacks and we worked together. And a week later, she came back and goes, Cam, hip pain gone, knee pain gone, back pain gone. Like, that's great. And then she said, watch this, laid on her back and just did a perfect 80-degree bilateral active straight leg raise without the band. And I said, that's really good. I'm really, really proud of you. And she goes, this is insane. Like, I didn't realize that this was possible. And then she started putting dots together saying, is this what the coaches have done to me over in Canada? And I said, I don't think it's the coaches. I just don't think they understand what you need. So we worked together for 20 weeks based on that, like based on her buying into a system where I didn't badmouth anyone and I didn't tell her that she was doing a really bad job and I didn't say she was in a danger zone. All I did was just let her come up with the solutions and let her find the problems. And I guided and nudged her. I helped her find that context. And over 20 weeks, we got to running, I think it was like 30 plus Ks a week, something like that. She was averaging 150 to 160 grams of protein a day. She dropped 8.5, 9 kilos when she went back. And when she went back, she smashed her like 2-mile time trial by, I don't know, like a minute and a half or something, which was cool because she's a big girl. But again, that's an example or a case study where many coaches, and this is why it says too hard basket up the top here. Many coaches looked at her as if having like a lack of ethic, like a lack of work ethic problem or a not strong enough problem. And all of the specialists looked at her as just not wanting to commit to the surgery that would fix her health problem. But none of them even thought to look at the underlying factors, which was how much stress is compounding on this 22-year-old female athlete with high output and not enough input. And what can we do to maybe remedy some of that to see what would happen? I didn't think any of the amazing things that happened to her would happen. All I wanted to do was just help nudge her in a different way so that I was making a measurable change in her homeostasis based on what we could do metabolically. And it worked, which is great. I'm grateful for that. And I learned a lot from it as well. But it also highlights the fact that not every problem when it comes to athlete development is a strength problem. And she was struggling to manifest strength and body. They call it body. She was struggling to manifest body on the court. She was getting bodied really hard on the court, but she was strong. Like she can bench press when she's fit. She can bench press 75 reps for like, I don't know, 3 or 4 reps. They're grindy, but they're strong. And she wasn't able to manifest that strength when she was on the court. So they thought she had a strength problem. And then she's struggling to keep up with all of the other runners. So they think she has a fitness problem. And then she obviously starts breaking down with injuries. So soft tissue work through the hips and then soft tissue injury through the hips and the knees. And they think that she's broken. And then they go and see a physician who specializes in hips and knees. And he sees a hammer related problem or a scalpel related problem and comes up with a scalpel related solution for it. So this one is one of those ones where it goes in the too hard basket for a lot of those coaches, but these athletes are my bread and butter because I like to look at things from a different perspective based on the experiences that I've had and the knowledge that I've accrued over, nearly a decade. And it's the little changes here that make a really big difference, particularly for such a young girl who's now able to navigate college life a little easier, and she's able to sort of stand up for herself and say, here's what I need and here's when I need it. And it's good to see that it influences the team around her because now they're able to win a lot more with a better player on the court than having her sit on the sidelines. So that was a really fun, wasn't for her, but it was fun for me, I guess, in the hindsight. That was a really fun 20 weeks. And, by the end of 20 weeks, she was smashing out like 8 or 9 runs a week and they were all pain-free and they were really, really strong. And a lot of it was done with nose breathing conditioning. And we saw some really significant gains on top of that. So I was very proud of that. That's a fun little case study to contemplate. Okay, let's recap. So the science of stress and adaptation be categorized as very, very rapid cellular problem solving, which is we know as mitosis. The difference between stress and exposure can be the difference between steering closer to or further away from robust function. If you can't measure it, then you're not dosing it, and it's not an exposure, it's a stress. And you should know the difference. It's important to know the difference. Oh, you bugger. Regardless of what we do, the body will adapt. It will always adapt. This is the principle of cellular physiology, what many know as the SAID principle, which we talked about. But just because the body can and will adapt to it should not encourage us to tar all of our clients with the same brush. And here's another example, speaking of tar. The body will adapt to anything. The moment it stops adapting, you'll know because they die. The person dies. That's the whole point of it, right? And I like to make this example where I haven't had a cigarette in maybe 6 years. If I was to go and have a cigarette now, I'd be coughing my lungs out. But if I was to have a cigarette every day for 2 weeks, I'd stop coughing my lungs out after 2 weeks. I've now adapted to the process of smoking, but smoking isn't good for me. Just because the body can and will adapt to it doesn't mean that it should, and doesn't mean that it's good for it. And yet, as I said before, in terms of, say, cellular respiration, many of us get stuck in glycolysis, and we're reliant on glycogen and proteogenesis to get the ATP just to keep ourselves standing up or getting up out of bed. And the path of least resistance is that glycolytic energy system, or respiratory method. But the path of most efficiency would be aerobic respiration, because we net a whole bunch more ATP at the other end, and we're offsetting a lot of carbon as we go. And yet no one wants to do the light, gentle aerobic work. Everyone wants to do the hard, sweaty work. And as I said, if people want to work with me and just get sore and sweaty, they can pay me $90 and I'll stand in a sauna and hit them with a stick. They're not going to get better. They'll get better at standing in a sauna, but the stick's still going to hurt. And then this last point here, remember, graduated exposure implies a level of individualization as each case presents itself. They need context. They need context. And this is why I've also struggled to put 10 years worth of knowledge into, say, a course or an ebook, because I can't make context fit to 20 people in a room unless I have a chance to sit down with them and hear about what they've done for the last 30 years and learn what they're doing now to better themselves, and then making changes on the fly to the way that I teach them or communicate with them, so that I can make context for them as they learn it, as they adapt. So they need context, or the adaptations may be impaired or slowing developing. And this can be noted as well in cueing, where if somebody has, say, a mobility restriction and you're trying to cue them into a position, either loaded or unloaded, and they're not getting it, it's not that the cue is bad, it's that the nervous system may not be able to decipher the information coming in through the proprioceptors, and it just can't get into the position. Unless you prove that they do have the mobility, and if they do have the mobility, well, now you've just got a motor control problem, which you can cue based on the constraints that you put into place. If you're just saying the same words to somebody and they're not getting it, one of two things needs to happen. You need to change what you say, or you need to assess the person and make sure they can get into the position you're asking for. And that's the context. So that's assessment. You assess to get context. And then the adaptations won't be impaired, because you'll know where someone's limit is. And then you can train them to that limit. If they're slow in developing, then you may be missing something you've left on the table or in your assessment. Bang, look at that, Finn. Le Finn.